Welcome back, scholars. We are now going to complete our independent practice. So, as a reminder, our discussion prompts for today are: how does the author use imagery to characterize Cleopatra? And how does the author use word choice to characterize Cleopatra? Now, let's remember, scholars, imagery is the picture that the author paints in your mind. So we're going to now dive back into the poem and use our evidence that we've already selected. It should be on our T-chart. And we're going to analyze first, and then determine if it has a negative or positive connotation. So scholars, in front of you, you should have a T-chart that looks very similar to the T-chart on your screen. So if you look, our very first piece of evidence under imagery is her mouth is fragrant as a vine. Again, that piece of evidence is her mouth is fragrant as a vine. We now need to go in and think, what imagery, what picture does the author paint in our head? I'm going to give you a few moments to kind of just process it. Think to yourself, think aloud, share with your neighbor if you're studying or looking at this video with a classmate, and just think, what picture did this paint in my mind? Her mouth is fragrant as a vine. So now that we've had time to think that, we are now going to write our analysis. All right? So when I say go, you have 1 minute. You are writing your analysis. Be sure that you write it with the appropriate evidence. This evidence is her mouth is fragrant as a vine. You have 1 minute. Go. 18 seconds. All right, scholars, now that we've written our analysis, and no, our analysis will not all look the exact same. But as you can see, I wrote, for me, in my mind, the image that it painted, it really highlighted that Cleopatra is beautiful. It highlighted her physical beauty. So now we need to think, does this have a positive or negative connotation? When you write, if you think it's positive, you're going to say positive and you're going to tell why. If it has a negative, you're going to say negative and then tell why. Got it? All right. You will have 1 minute. Again, you're telling if it has a positive connotation or a negative connotation. Now, scholars, you cannot just write positive or just negative. You need to explain why. All right. You have 1 minute explaining positive or negative connotation. Let's go. 18 seconds. All right, scholars. So I wrote that this has a positive connotation. It explains that she is sweet and she is beautiful, fragrant. As a vine is where I got sweet. And then I already mentioned that my deeper meaning, my analysis showed that this highlighted her beauty. So that's where I got that she was beautiful. Scholars, we are now going to do our second imagery. So we're looking at our second piece of evidence, and that reads, her great curled hair makes luminous her cheeks. Her great curled hair makes luminous her cheeks. So we now need to go in and do a deep analysis. What does it mean? What picture did that author paint? Her great curled hair makes luminous her cheeks. What did you see? I'm going to give you 1 minute. You are going to write your analysis. Let's go. You should be writing. "13 seconds." All right, scholars. So my analysis again, this author talks about Cleopatra's beauty a lot. So I wrote that it highlights her physical beauty and that she appears full of light. The full of light comes from the word luminous. Again, it highlights her physical beauty and that she appears full of light. Scholars, we now need to go in and determine, does this have a positive or a negative connotation? Again, does this have a positive or negative connotation, and explain why? If it's positive, why is it positive? If it is negative, explain why it is negative. You have 1 minute. Let's go. We have 9 seconds. So scholars, again, this has a positive connotation. It explains that Cleopatra is full of light, and that's something that's positive, right? And then it also talks about her beauty, and no one mentions beauty in a negative way. So this is positive. So scholars, when you do your independent practice, you're going to have a very similar piece of evidence. Once you have your evidence, you need to create an analysis. What or how does the author paint the picture in your mind, and what does it mean? After you have your analysis, you then need to tell if it has a positive or negative connotation. We're moving, and I obviously have the hiccups. Take this time to kind of revise your notes. All right, scholars. So now we're going to focus on word choice. Why did the author choose to use those words to characterize Cleopatra? So after we determine, and we already have our evidence, we need to determine the why. When we determine the why, our analysis is going to represent the synonyms. What other words or what words also mean what the author wrote? After we determine our analysis, we're going to look at those words. Do those words have a positive or a negative connotation? And after we decide that, we're going to write positive or negative and then explain why. Got it? So let's look at our very first piece of evidence under word choice. Our very first piece of evidence is Amorous deep lids divine. Amorous deep lids divine. We need to break that down. What exactly does that mean? Now, scholars, I know that some of these words or the use of the words is not what we're used to. It's completely okay. So let's look at what this says. We need to look at amorous deep and then lids divine. So scholars, amorous means full of love, full of love, something that is loving. I could easily say that Miss Richardson has an amorous love or an amorous appreciation for her students. Like, guys, she absolutely love you guys. She's always bragging, always sharing stories. Like, you guys, you rock. I knew you before I knew you. So, scholars, we are going to dive in. So the first thing we need to do, I've already told you what the amorous means. It means full of love, something that is loving. Now let's look at divine. I want you on your own to determine what divine means. Now, let me give you a clue. We talked about divine in other lessons. So you're writing the synonym for divine. Going to give you 1 minute. Again, you're telling me what are the synonyms? What does divine means? What does amorous means? Got it? Let's go. I am intentionally going to wait in writing what divine means because I know that I have some little sneaky peeks. Kind of like my Edwin. All right. All right, scholars. So I have broken down these two words that the author used to characterize Cleopatra. Amoris meaning full of love, loving, and then divine. Now, scholars, we have talked about divine a lot, meaning godly. Something that is perfect or God-like. So those are the synonyms to help me explain and break down the evidence that I use. Now, what's my next step? Yes, I need to determine if it has a positive or negative connotation when characterizing Cleopatra. Scholars, is this negative or positive? Yes, this is positive. So I am going to write positive, and do I just stop? No, I need to explain why it is positive. Scholars, you will have 1 minute. You're going to go in where we've agreed it's positive. We now need to explain why it's positive. Go ahead and take this minute. Get ready. Go. 22 seconds. Five seconds. All right. So for this, I put that it had a positive connotation. When you think of love, it's nothing negative. We've used the word perfect and godly. So I put that it emphasizes her heavenly beauty. Okay, scholars, so let's look at our very last word choice. The author used the word imperial. What does that word mean? I want you to go in and find synonyms. What other words could we use for imperial? Thought of them? All right, let's take 1 minute. We're writing in our under our analysis. What are synonyms for imperial? All right, 1 minute, go. All right, scholars. So for my analysis, I wrote regal, royal, and powerful. So, scholars, let's use some of our schema. Based on what we already know about Cleopatra, is this a positive or negative connotation? Imperial, regal, royal, powerful. You ready? All right, let's write. You have 1 minute. You're writing if it's a positive or negative connotation. And remember, you must explain why. Let's go. 1 minute, go. We have 15 seconds. All right, scholars. So I wrote that this was positive, that the word imperial emphasizes her power and her leadership. So in your independent practice today, you will have another piece of evidence. You must analyze that evidence. Remember, when it is a word choice, the easiest way to analyze the evidence is to find synonyms that represent the word. After you've done your analysis of the word, you're going to write if it has a positive or a negative connotation and explain why. So, scholars, you should have in front of you a T-chart with two pieces of evidence that shows how the author uses imagery to paint a picture to characterize Cleopatra. Then you should have two pieces of evidence that shows how the author uses word choice to characterize and explain Cleopatra. So, scholars, you have completed today's lesson. Remember, in your independent practice, you will have one piece of evidence for word choice and one piece of evidence for imagery. Be sure to use your T-chart to help you guide and explain in your independent practice. It has been a pleasure, and I will see you on Wacky Wednesday.